Yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Never go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what these old men have to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and this is episode number 20.
Woo!
Halfway, George. So, it is me, your fantastic host, Mr. Andy Sledge, and my co-host, and once again, steak purchaser extraordinaire, Mr. George Bradley. George, how on earth are you on this fine and wonderful day?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, a steak purchaser, but also I wasn't a steak finisher again. I couldn't quite get through it. But yeah, it was a good day. That really enjoyed that.
It was indeed, and you put a smile not only upon my face but also upon the face of my son. Who
it was nice to meet him. Yeah, he's a lovely lad.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of people say that, but he, like I say, he is very polite and well spoken.
Yeah.
To you, not to me. Treats me like an absolute prick, but that's just the way it goes, I think, with dads. So yes, that is the way. So yeah, so we had a very, very nice meal out last Thursday. Last Thursday, wasn't it? And so we are recording a little bit late this week, but we are also on the day after the semi-final of the European Championships. So England have progressed through into the final. What an absolutely fantastic time. Yeah. So yes, was very, very excited about that. I've got a few other bits on today. Actually, I've got to go and doing a favour of mine. I've got to pop over to fucking Essex, of all places. So, yes, I will be
Bandit country.
In deepest, darkest Romford later on today. So yes, so I'm gonna. But I've had me jab. I've had me jab, so I'm okay.
Just keep your doors locked on the car.
So, apart from steak purchasing last week and football yesterday, anything else been happening in the world of young Mr. Bradley this week, George?
Nah, not really. No, I mean, I had an interview with phone interview yesterday with my work because they gradually want to get me back. So I had
How
to sort
dare they?
Yeah, just I know. Yeah. Tick a few boxes with an interview. I mean, it's pretty standard stuff, but I would imagine the end of the month I could be back in the world of work.
Oh my good Lord, that'll be a shock to your system, won't it?
I mean, they even give me the option of, you don't have to, you can come back gradually. You can do a couple of days, I've been off for a year and a fucking half. I said, look, I'm good to go back. I'm all right. I'm not disabled. Just
you're doing the
get
right
me back.
You're doing the right thing. So yes, and I have, me personally, like I say, a bit of a, not really too much actually happened in the week. Been hitting the gym still quite a lot. But my tomorrow is a big day. So one of my best friends who up until tomorrow morning is residing with Her Majesty's government for not arson like Moxie. Yeah. But the let's just say the distribution of some certain chemicals. So yeah, he was.
Is he the guy? He's the guy you had the barbecue for, and that when he come out. Is that you the barbecue?
No. That was a different else. Guy. Yeah, no.
Oh, right.
That was a mate of mine, Robin. No, like I say, he's out. What I'm saying is there's my other mate. He gets out tomorrow. But check this. So he gets out tomorrow morning, getting married tomorrow afternoon.
Oh, bloody hell.
Yeah, I mean, that's a full day of it if there ever was one. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I was a bit like, could you not just wait a week? But no, I don't know whether it's him or whether it's his missus or what have you. But yes, so he has been a guest of the government for the last 5 years, and they were
on holiday.
Yeah, they were planning on getting married before he became before his little jaunt, his little forced holiday avec le government. But yeah, so Her Majesty's pleasure has had him for the last few years. So yes, so like I say, they're getting out. He's getting out tomorrow morning, getting married tomorrow afternoon. So tomorrow afternoon, I'm off up to Oxfordshire, North Oxfordshire.
Oh yeah.
Well, close to Warwickshire. In fact, I think it's in Banbury.
Oh, I know that. Yeah, Banbury.
Yeah, Banbury. Yeah, so we're going up to where Banbury Cross and Ryder Cockhorse and all of that.
Yeah. I thought it was a poem.
Yeah. So we're going to go. And I mean, essentially, I'm not going to be hanging around. I mean, as you well know, George, I'm no longer a drinker or user of recreational chemicals these days.
Yeah.
On the straight and narrow, Mr. Good Boy. So there will be several people who will potentially be abusing alcohol and other substances at this function. So literally, myself and my young lady, we are going to head up there. We're going to get there. We'll basically be we'll be the last one to arrive and the first one to leave, I think.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we're going to turn up there, watch the ceremony, have a bite to eat, and then bid everyone farewell before it gets messy.
I'm sure your mate will be pretty eager for his wedding night as well, won't he? After all that.
Well, I mean, the thing was, is he so. He got a DCAT, so he was in. Obviously, when you get banged up, you're in a proper jail, and then after a certain while, you go to an open prison. So But he was a bit like he went. So he spent like 3.5 years in a locked CCAT prison, like a proper jail, and then eventually, with good behaviour, he got sent to a DCAT, and then so he got sent to Ford Open Prison. And he was, so he was there, and then you've got to be there for I think you've got to be there for 3 months before they let you out for a weekend.
Oh, right.
You're allowed out, they let you out for home leaves, to try and reacclimatise you and all of that. Yeah. And so he had his first home leave, and they were like, he was all like, yeah, I've got my DCAT. And then obviously, so he's gone out and he's with his girlfriend. So, what you were hinting at with regards to the wedding night, George, he had a little bit of a taste of that. Yeah. And then the good Lord went, cool story, have a pandemic and you're getting locked up properly again. So so he wasn't allowed out again. So that was he was a bit upset with that, but what can you do? So and then he got caught. He actually got caught with a phone inside the jail, and they shipped him back off to another CCAT for the last few months. So he's been in Rochester in Kent for the last few months. So so like I say, he gets out tomorrow morning. So very much looking forward to that. Yeah. Naughty boy, and hopefully he won't do it again. Anyway, so like I said, that's what's happening for me this weekend. But what we would actually like to happen is we got a very nice email from a young lady, actually. To be honest, I forgot to write her name down. What we'll do is we'll mention that next week. So she wrote a fairly lengthy email in about how she was a big fan, etc., etc. I forgot. We'll give her a shout out next week. But if anybody else would like to email in and provide us with any feedback, compliments, or just straight up abuse that me and George love as the masochists that we are, you can contact us via email on Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. That's Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. We do welcome followers on our social media. So please go to our Instagram and follow us on Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. That's @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Please follow us on Twitter @Auf Again. That's Twitter @Auf Again. What we would like you to do is go and follow and share our Facebook page amongst your friends. So please do search on Facebook Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And like I say, please do like and share the Facebook page. Please do subscribe to YouTube if you are not already. So go to YouTube and search Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. click the subscribe button and also click that bell. And what that'll do is that will alert you to any new episodes. But if mine and George's visual presence in your life is not required and you would just like to hear our dulcet tones, we are available on all good podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Podcast, Breaker, and many, many more. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Our new episodes are released every single Friday at 10 a.m. And our theme music is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dusky. So like I say, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As always, our sponsor is our friends at Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website is topguntattoo.co.uk and their telephone number is 01189 968 667. And as always, we have two fantastic offers for the listeners of our podcast. Offer number one, you can get yourself a 20% discount off any tattoo with Zach by quoting the code word Hadaway and Shite. So Hadaway and Shite Man. So if you contact Zach by either in person or on the telephone and say, Zach, I am an avid listener of the podcast. I want my 20% discount, Hadaway and Shite Man, and he will facilitate that for you. But also don't forget, I say don't forget, I forgot to bring it with me last week, but all of our listeners are entitled to a free Neville and Lottie tattoo, and not just the stick-on ones that we have here. You can get yourself a free, real Neville and Lottie tattoo by emailing us in at aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com, and we will take you down to Top Gun Tattooing, and we will pay for and photograph you getting your Neville and Lottie tattoo. So yeah, George, we were a little bit pushed for time last week. Due to me having a work thing going on, and then I fucking stupidly forgot the Neville and Lottie tattoo. So what it means is you are going to have to come up again at some point in the near future.
Oh yeah, definitely. And
we will get that done. But don't bring women that are going to eat food off my plate, George. Let's go. Yeah. So that is all of the boring stuff out of the way. So this week is episode 20 of the podcast, and this relates to series 2, episode 7, which is entitled No Sex Please, We're Brickies, which is a reference. There was a stage play which was turned into a film, No Sex Please, We Are British.
Yeah, I remember the stage play in the West End. Yeah, as a kid in the 70s, used to go past there all the time.
And then it was Ronnie Corbett who was in the film.
Oh, was it? I've never actually seen the film. No,
Me neither. However, I have met Ronnie Corbett once.
Oh, right. A bit of a small chap, is he? Yeah.
Well, this was it. I remember it was me. It was when I was working in London once, and there was me and a couple of my friends, my work friends, and we were having an argument about where we were going to go for lunch, right? And so we were stood on Jermyn Street, like where the Piccadilly Arcade is.
I know well. Where the pub I worked at was just across the way. Yeah.
So it was where Turnbull and Asser is. You know that.
Just by the Ritz, isn't it?
Yeah. And so you know where the posh shirt shop is, Turnbull and Asser.
Oh yes.
It's where the royal family get their clothes made. So we were stood on Jermyn Street outside Turnbull and Asser. And obviously someone wanted to go somewhere, someone wanted to go somewhere else, and someone wanted to go somewhere else. So we're having a big shout, and we're all salespeople. We're all pretty forceful about our opinions. And we're like, I'm not fucking going there. I'm not going there. Fuck you. Da 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 da. Like having a big argument about where we were going for our lunch. And all of a sudden I heard this voice just goes, that sounds like an interesting argument. And I turned around. And I was about to turn around and go, I think you better fuck off, mate. Like putting your nose in where it's not wanted. And I've turned around like that, and there's nobody there. Until I looked down, and it was Ronnie Corbett. And Ronnie Corbett with his tiny, tiny little hands like that, and he's like, hello. And I was like, Ronnie fucking Corbett, what are you doing? Ronnie Corbett piping into the argument me and my friends were having about where we were going for lunch.
But apparently he used to drive, he drove a roller. but he used to have cushions on the seat.
Surely he must have had
because he was so small.
Probably like. Do you remember in Indiana Jones when the geezer's got the wooden blocks tied to his feet so he could reach pedals? That would probably be it. So yes. Anyway, Ronnie Corbett. So yeah, No Sex Please Wear Brickies, and it was originally aired on the 4th of April, 1986.
Oh, my 21st year being 21 then.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't even 10 at that point. I was 9 years old, young George. So, and obviously this episode was also written by the greatest writer that we've had on as a guest so far.
Brilliant interview.
Mr. Stan Hay. So yes, this was again. I think this was the 7th out of the 8th. No, the 5th out of the 6th episode that Stan wrote. So we have one cameo that we are going to talk about, and yes, it is. There's some absolute classic lines in this episode. I mean, absolutely love this episode. It's got everything that you need in here. What is it? Do you remember in series 1 when they're talking about the newspapers and he says intrigue, violence, and sex, and that's just back page. Well, we get some of that within this episode. So the episode opens up, and it's a direct follow-on from last week's episode. So last week's episode finished with the lads having the punch-up with Big Baz and the other goons. And so the goons have turned up to try and force the lads back to work. And the lads showed Big Baz and his goons who was in charge. So they have obviously just had this punch-up, and they come walking into the pub after their victory over Ali's goons. And they are obviously very, very jubilant at their victory. So Oz comes in and he just says, get 7 pints on the bar as quick as you like, Arthur. And Arthur Pringle is he's not used to seeing the lads at this time of day, and he says it's a bit of even you lot. And Wayne says, well, we're taking industrial action, ain't we, Tiger? And he calls them Tiger, has that little bit of a jibe at him. And Bomber says, get the beer out in support, Arthur. And he said, and Pringle says, I thought strikes had gone out of fashion with the working class since Scargill got his arse kicked. And I was like, Oz will be too happy with that, seeing as he had his picture of Arthur Scargill up. And Neville says, this was a unanimous decision, Arthur, no need for a ballot. And Wayne says, besides, we're striking on a matter of principle here, son, care of the elderly. So you should be flattered, shouldn't you? And obviously they all have a laugh, and Pringle is pretty stone-faced and not too happy with the jibe once again at him. And Barry says, one day I reckon our names will be as famous as the Tall Puddle Martyrs in the great tapestry of organised labour. And yeah, do you know the story of the Tall Puddle Martyrs, George?
No, I don't.
Well, not me really. I mean, it's something we did in history at school. But they must have been strikers, and I believe they got sent off to Australia. And that's what he says. And Pringle says, perhaps you'll suffer the same fate. Transportation to Australia. And Oz says, what was the names of them Tall Puddlers? To Barry, and Barry says, I don't know the individual identity of the gentleman concerned, Oz, but that's not important. No, it's their collective sacrifice that counts. I should think they're a couple of Poldorks or Penmaricks, because they're from Bomber's part of the world. And Oz says, I wonder what we would have been called. And Pringle has a little jibe back, and he says, I can think of a few names. And Bomber says, what about the Thornley Manor Magnificence? And Neville says, well, it'll be the Derbyshire Dummies if Ali Fraser closes down the job without paying us. And Harry's like, no despondency, please. We've won a great victory this morning. And Pringle puts the drinks on the bar and he says, right, that'll be £6.09, or do you want me to contribute this to the strike fund? And Wayne says, no, you might as well have it while we've got it, Arthur. There you go. And he hands over some money. And Barry starts, he's like, yeah, right, perhaps we should organise a kitty until the dispute's resolved. And Oz is like, bollocks, hey, you didn't see him getting his hand in his pocket often, do you? Unless you're playing billiards with yourself.
Mhm.
So Wayne, he says, oh, cheers, Oz. I suppose you'll be getting the next round in, will you? And Oz treats that comment with a contempt it deserves and walks off towards the dartboard. And he says, I'll mark and I'll play the winner for a tenner. Anyway, so obviously negative Neville, once again, he says it'll be a bit of a choker if Ali Fraser pulls the plug on us without paying us. And Wayne says, I don't suppose we're over generous with the redundancy payments. And Neville is sort of, prompting Wayne to foreshadow a little bit about later on when he might need some money. And he says, have you managed to save anything yet? And Wayne says, let me think, no. Which, considering I've been living like a Trappist monk, considering we've been living like Trappist monks, is quite an achievement. He says, mind you, give me any income you like, Nev, and I will live beyond it, which is pretty much the same for anyone.
Yeah.
And Neville says, what have you done with it then? Send some back home to Krista. And Wayne's like, yeah, a few bob here and there, I don't know, mate, it just seems to slip through my fingers, don't it? He says, mind you, that car don't help much. And again, sort of premonition of what's to happen. And I mean, clearly, he's obviously not sent any money back to Krista. And Neville says, thirsty motors, then BMW, see, still, if the worst comes to the worst, you can always sell it, I suppose. It must be worth a few bob. And he says, oh, yeah, I could probably get $5 or $6 grand for it. He says, mind you, I couldn't unload it in this country, could I? It's still German registered. And obviously, at this point, Pringle, his ears prick up.
Yeah.
And he eavesdrop on what Wayne and Neville are saying. And he says, of course, there's the small matter of the old import duty, which I inadvertently overlooked. And this is some ammunition that Pringle is going to use. And Neville says, there's always complications in life for us working blokes, isn't there? You claw your way up the cliff face and there's always some bugger at the top waiting to stamp on your finger ends, and it's probably Ali Fraser's turn today. So they go to the table and Barry is sat with Bomber and he says, what will you do if we get laid off, Bom? Head for home. And he says, I should think so, Barry. I'll throw myself on the mercy of the wife in the DHSS. Mind you, it's a toss-up as to who will give me a harder time. How about you? Would your young lady keep you? And he says, she won't even have me at the moment, let alone keep me. No, I'll give my business a couple of months, and if it doesn't take off, I'll try one of those sunrise industries. And Bomber says, I can't see you as a milkman, Barry. I'm not sure if that's a joke or not. And Barry laughs and he says, no, Bob, I'm talking about high technology jobs, computers, all that stuff. Yeah, with my electrical background, it should stand me a chance. He says, mind you, I'll probably be replaced by a smidgen of silicon with 1,000 million faculties and a bloody Oxbridge accent. And Bomber, again, not sure if this is a joke or not. And he says, nothing can take the place of you, Barry. And Barry's like, thanks, Bomb. He goes, thanks very much. So Barry's been paid a compliment. So anyway, we cut now, and so Ali Fraser must have been waiting at the Cross Keys or something with, after it set Big Baz down, because the car pulls up in the Market Square. Now this is
smashed.
This is the same Market Square, though. Remember where so long back Oz got caught with a trout.
Yeah.
That was the Market Square. I don't know if it's supposed to be that Market Square, but that's what it actually is location-wise. So obviously the car pulls up, the windscreen's smashed, and Dennis is driving, and Ali Fraser. They get out, and Ali Fraser is quite taken with the location, and he says, "It's very nice, Dennis." He says, "Reminds me a wee bit of Berwick upon Tweed." Dennis says, "You never struck me as your sort of town, really, Ali." And he tells a little story. He says, I fancied it quite a lot, Dennis. Only problem is they weren't so keen on becoming part of my slot machine empire, and I was very smartly shown the route south. And Dennis says, cheers from Berwick. You and the Romans must have something in common. And he says, oh, aye. He says, but the Romans bottled it eventually, Dennis. Ali Fraser sticks around. Hey. Come on, let's get upstairs and get a wee drink for this architect friend of mine. So, I don't know if you noticed. So this is supposed to be a temporary office for the architect. And as they're walking in the door, there's a brass plaque on the door with the architect's name. I'm like, doesn't seem very temporary, does it? But again, I'll make the argument that renting an office to be the architect of one building was a vast expense that they could have done without. Anyway, so they go into Howard's office, and Howard's a bit surprised. He sees, obviously, Ali Fraser walks in with Dennis, and he goes, Ali, I didn't know you were in England. And he says, I had to come over, didn't I? Howard sort out the uprising. And Howard says, oh dear, I hope there was no unpleasantness. He says, oh no, more sort of a skirmish, Howard. A lover's tiff, wouldn't you say so, Dennis? And Dennis makes a joke. He says, aye, Big Baz and Bomber will have announced their engagement any minute, I expect. And so they sit down on the sofa, and he says, now then, Howard, you must have some malt whiskey in this expensive-looking office I'm paying for. And he says, coming right up, he says, bring the bottle over. Dennis and I have got a bit of negotiating to do. He says, that's it, shirt sleeve order, beer and sandwiches at TUC headquarters. And Howard says, I've got a couple of sesame bars, if you like. And he says, no, thank you. And he says, and then Dennis says, I'll save mine for the budgies cage. So they pour out some whiskey, and he says, right now, item 1 on the agenda. As a result of the case put forcibly to me by Dennis and his brothers, I hereby agree to upgrade the ongoing conversion on Thornley Manor. Now, Howard, have you still got that medium-range budget on file, have you? And he says, well, yes, but it means jumping up another 20 grand or so. And he says, no, I can live with that. Dennis has persuaded me that it would be a great pity to skimp on a building of such architectural heritage, especially if there's going to be a lot of old dears knocking around soon. On that subject, just make a note that on the pad there to increase the projected fee structure for the resident gentlefolk. Dennis says, passing the costs on already, Ali. And he says, oh, Dennis. He says, if we're going to go upmarket, we can attract a better class of pensioner. If you look in the wills column of the Daily Tory graph, you will see there's quite a few around with a package stashed away. So Ali Fraser is always one to try and take advantage of any situation.
Oh, yeah.
And he says, Howard, the architect, says to Dennis, he says, I'm amazed you got him to agree to this. And Dennis says, right. He says, well, beneath that flinty exterior beats a heart of gold, man. And Ali Fraser says, don't let it get around Dennis. And he says Dennis says he's also aware that if he hadn't changed his mind, the VAT people would have got an enormous tip-off about certain unpaid taxes on the building work. So they've got Ali Fraser over a barrel. And then he says, item 2, he says, I hereby agree to waive my rights on the rent monies payable to me from Dennis and his boys after having squatted on my property for the last few weeks. So he's, again, he's reminding Dennis that, if he wanted to, he could make things a little bit difficult. And then Dennis makes a joke. He says, for heart of gold, read nugget. And then he says, and as for my personal loan to Dennis, the terms of the debt remain the same. Complete the job on the manor and we're all square. And I think I can see my way to writing off the interest payable on the loan, which incidentally, Dennis is currently running at £2,648, give or take a few coppers. Dennis says, what's the catch? And he says, no catch. Absolutely straightforward proposition as to regards your boys. You keep them on the payroll for my next project and we will be as sweet as a bun. So Dennis goes back to the lads and he pulls up. The lads are walking through the village and with his infamous saying, he says, well, what's the word then, Den? Are we out of a job? And miraculously, he says, no. He said, listen, he says, Ali's finally agreed to put some proper work in at the manor. And all of the lads are like, you know, obviously clearly relieved at that. And he says, and Oz says, I knew it'd twist the bastard's arm over that. And Dennis says, but there's a little small, as you say, might say there's a small snag. And Neville says, what's that? He wants us to take a cut in wages, negative Neville. And he says, no, he wants us to do the next job for them. And Oz says, we haven't even finished this one yet, have we? And Dennis just goes, in Spain. And Neville is like, Spain? You know, absolutely.
1 million miles away.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't believe it. And so they cut to Spain. Now, Kenny Ames is having lunch with Vicky on the front in Portabanus, where you and I have been past many a time. So I know exactly where they are. And if you see in the background, there's like a little tower, like a tower, for want of a better word, like a stone tower, which is right on the front at Portabanus as you come into the harbour. So they're literally sitting on the front line. If from that restaurant that they're sitting in, there are bars. You know, if you turned right, they've got Sinatra's bar in the front.
Oh, Sinatra's.
If you turn left and go back onto the second line, that's where Lineker's is, down there where I used to work. So, so Kenny Ames is sat with Vicky, and Vicky once again is makes a misnomer about what she reads, and she's reading the menu, and she's very disgruntled at what she reads. She's like, here, what the hell's this? Rape. She goes, I knew these Spaniards were a bit forward, but that's a bit strong, isn't it? So there's a word on the menu which is rape, R-A-P-E. But Kenny Ames, he says, no. He says, that is rapé, Vicky. Rapé. It's Spanish for monkfish. He goes, monkfish? And he goes, yeah, that's right. Ugly little bleeder, but it tastes nice. Just like your friend Ali. Anyway, there's something... They sometimes serve it as scampi. You know, it tastes a little bit the same. And she goes, scampi. Well, why didn't they just say so in the first place? I know where I am with scampi. Anyway, what did you want to see us about? And he says, do I need an excuse to invite a pretty girl to lunch? And she says, no, but I'll need one Ali will expect me to have one if he finds out. And he goes, well, it's about this property development scheme of Ali's. And she goes, the first I've heard of it. And Kenny says, does he not confide in you? And I mean, obviously, he clearly doesn't. And she goes, well, of course he does, but he's got better things to tell me about than business. And anyway, the only property development I'm interested in is getting our pool finished and the barbecue done. And he says, well, let me run it down for you. There are certain members of the British community, myself included, who are going to have to make themselves scarce if the Spanish government alter the extradition rules. And Vicky, you know, not thinking and really puts her foot in it. She goes, you mean criminals?
You don't say that too loud there.
and so, you know, Kenny Ames, you know, has a quick look over his shoulder. And he says, anyway, Ali is running around offering himself as a sort of emergency estate agent with cash me quick written across his forehead. Needless to say, this sort of opportunism is ruining the status quo. And, and Vicky, once again, she shows herself of what intellectual level she is. And she goes, they don't live here out here as well, do they? Obviously speaking about the band. And Kenny says, look, Vicky, all I want you to do is to whisper a few words of warning in your pillow talk to Ali, all right? And you might save him and me a lot of strife. And she goes, well, all right, but I'll see what I can do. But it's a long, hard job getting him roused at night, you know, and I'm not going to spoil a good thing. And by whispering, watch it in his ear hole. So they cut to the from Spain back to England.
Mm.
And they're obviously back in Newcastle because they're in the lawyer's office, Malcolm Hallwood. Or is it in Ali's office, but Malcolm Hallwood's there.
With his little notebook.
Yeah, and Big Baz walking in with his broken nose. And so Ali walks in, he says, hello there, Malcolm, how are you? And he says, fine, thanks, Ali. How was Spain? And he says, hot and crowded, although possibly about to become a little less crowded, which may be very good news for us. And he says, oh, Baz, see if you can find Pamela to rustle up a pot of tea for us. And he says, yes, boss, with his broken nose, and he's not looking too tough these days, is Big Baz. And Malcolm comments, he says, been in the wars. And he says he lost an argument with the roof of a Jaguar. Apparently now it's a convertible. And Malcolm says, I take it he didn't manage this on his own. He says, no. He was daft enough to tangle with one of the big lads working at the manor. Big bloke with a beard, Bomber or something. And Malcolm says, sounds like a good bloke to have on your side. And he says, well, yes. He says, they all are actually, which is why I would like you to apply that sharp legal mind of yours to the less than riveting subject of Spanish labour laws. And Malcolm quite rightly surmises, he says, in relation to British migrant workers, presumably, he says, correct. Know anything already? And he says, no, not much. He says, except the Spanish are fairly choosy about who they allow in to work. And Ali says, not so choosy about who they let in to play. So check it out and let me know in detail. And he says, right, I'll take the Spanish consul out to lunch. And Ali's not too impressed with that plan. He says, no. He says, no, you won't. He says, softly on this one, Malcolm. He says, and this is a fantastic line. He says, we don't want a bullfight in a China shop. And he says, the second thing is the old folks' home. Now the lads tell me they have they have it ready in a couple of weeks. I think it's time you started organising staff recruitment, placing adverts in the likes of Country Life and the like. And Malcolm says, get a matron first and the rest later, I suppose. And he just says, whatever. And he says, will you be sticking a Thornley Manor as a name? And he says, and again, this is a fantastic line. He says, will you be sticking a Thornley Manor as a name? And he says, don't know. I don't suppose they will let me use House of Fraser. And he has a little laugh at himself there, Ali. And Big Baz comes back in with the tea. And again, not looking like the tough man he once was. And Ali thinks the same, and he makes a joke. He says, look, he says, I think we might have found our matron, Malcolm. So they are back at the manor. We see the lads working, and Dennis, he's walking in the room and he says, I'm knackered. We've been thrashing it along today, haven't we? And Bomber says, new incentive schemes, Dennis. Sangria and senoritas works a treat. And Dennis says, it's a load of bollocks, really, and now we're only going to Skegness. Makes them laugh. And also says, I'll tell you what it is. If Fraser doesn't come up this Spanish trip, I'll personally brick him up alone in that shithouse. And Wayne says, listeners, if the trip doesn't come off, you can brick me up in there with him as well. I don't think I could live with a disappointment. Marbella, you've got your pick of your Euro crumpet in Marbella. Mm-hmm. And Neville says, we're supposed to be gone there to work to earn a bit of money, Wayne. Remember, money. And Barry says, you're wasting your breath, Nev. I think Wayne has invented a new form of currency, wages for sex. I don't think that's new. I think that's the oldest form of currency. Wouldn't you agree there?
Yeah.
And anyway, so Harry, the plumber, he says, it's crucifying me, this, lads. I mean, hearing all of this, knowing I can't come. And Moxie says, there's no way you can get out of it, Harry. And he says, not unless they put our dates back. I mean, fancy having open heart surgery at a time like this. Mm-hmm. I think he's talking about his wife. And he says, I mean, it's really inconsiderate. And I says, it's a bit of a piss I like, because we're about to need a plumber when we get over to España. You know what I mean? That's just one of the things they haven't cracked yet. Like playing football without hacking each other to death, or building hotels where all the windows fit, or getting all the hairs out of the backs of the bacon rind. I don't know where Oz has got that from. He says,
didn't Stan say in his interview that he wished he'd used Harry more?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think it was. I don't know. It might have been available. It might have been an availability issue or something like that. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, he was, he was a welcome part of the team, and I'm sure he could have been thingy. And then Oz, using a bit of a term that you probably couldn't get away with these days, he says these are some of the things that the Spics haven't said. So Wayne says, here, I'm getting all fired up with this Spanish talk. How about we put on a spot of practice? We put in a spot of practice tomorrow night with some
strumpet practice.
Some serious strumping. And he says, we could do with a bit of that. And Dennis says, no, he says, I'm off up home to see War Lass. And Neville says, oh yeah, can I cadge a lift? And he says, why, aye. And Neville's all happy. He says, good lad. And Barry says, he says, I'm going to wish, he says, I'm going to wish to Wolverhampton to confront Hazel. And Bomber says, Bomber's in. And Oz says, oh, aye, I'll go along. I didn't want your seconds mind London. And Wayne says, aye. He says, all right, so while you lot sort yourselves out, I'll go and consult the old guidebooks for the best source of action. And he says, ain't Manchester up this way somewhere? So they're obviously considering putting a bit of distance between themselves and Thornley Manor. Anyway, so Wayne walks outside and he sees somebody is eyeing up his car. And we don't know what's going on. And he says, can I help you, Squire? And he says, no. He says, oh, hello, no. I was just admiring the car. Yours, is it? And he goes, yeah, that's right. And he goes, German, I notice. And he goes, yeah, well, BMWs normally are. He goes, no, I meant the registration. And he points to the number plate that says DHB. And he says, that's the district of Dusseldorf, isn't it? Now, apparently, the DHB, well, it's just D is represents Dusseldorf on a number plate, not DHB. And he says, yeah, and then again, here's a classic line from Wayne. So the guy says, he says, I meant the registration. He points to the number plate and he says, DHB, that's the district of Dusseldorf, isn't it? And Wayne says, perhaps. He says, here, listen, seeing as you're so bloody good at initials, how about FO? Great line. And he goes, I don't know that one. And he goes, I didn't think you would. He goes, look, what's all this about, mate? The car ain't for sale, all right? And he goes, I'm glad to hear it, because having already avoided import duty, you wouldn't want to break the law again, would you, Mr. Wayne Winston Norris? And he shows his ID card from the Customs and Excise. And he tears a bit of paper off and he goes, your receipt, sir. Keys, please, sir. And he is impounding Wayne's car. So, obviously, Wayne goes to Dennis and explains the situation. He says, what's the damage? And Wayne says, I've got to find about 800 quid before I can reclaim her. Till then, she stays there. And Dennis says, you haven't got the money, presumably, have you? And he says, about £799 short of the mark, to be honest. And he says, well, now we're working. He says, I can pay you some back again tomorrow. And then after the next couple of weeks with Ali's bonus for finishing, that should cover it, shouldn't it? And he says, no, he says, it's all right. He says, I can find the money. I'm just a bit annoyed at myself for getting caught. See, when I drove it through Harwich, I told him I was just a visitor, didn't I? And he says, well, you are just a visitor, aren't you? And he says, you what? He says, yeah. He says, but what I mean is I should have put it in the wife's name. And Dennis says, can it not be registered in Krista's name now? And he says, no, it's obviously too late for that. So they cut to a montage, basically, of work once again going on in the manor. Moxie's plastering away, Barry's painting, and Wayne is
reading the guidebook.
Reading the guidebook about where they can go out on the lash. And at the end of the day, they all go to get paid. And so Dennis says, right, come and get your money. And they're all, yay! And he hands it out, Neville, Oz, Moxie, Wayne, Barry, Bomber. And Nev says, keep a tenner for petrol because he's driving up to Newcastle. And Dennis says, don't go pissing that against the wall. You'll never get your motor back, to Wayne. And he says, yeah, well, I've got to spend a little bit tonight. My big end needs servicing, don't it? Barry says, I think I'll treat Hazel to somewhere posh in Birmingham tonight. Reaffirm, he says reaffirm the troth. I think it must be that I betrothed to her.
Mm.
I played that a few times. I couldn't hear that particular word. And Moxie goes, oh, great. And Oz goes, what the hell's a troth? And what's Hazel want one for? And Barry says, it's a pledge of fidelity, Oz. Faithfulness. He goes, no wonder you've never heard of it. And Oz says, excuse me. He goes, I've been faithful to my Marjorie. He says, I've never humped another boiler within a month of seeing her.
Yeah, he has his trousers down at this point as well, doesn't he?
Yeah,
I think?
Yeah. Well, this is Oz's idea of fidelity. Never humping another boiler. And boiler's a proper Geordie word, that.
Yeah.
It was another boiler within a month of seeing her. And then Moxie points out, he goes, well, you haven't seen her for over a year, so that gives you plenty of scope, doesn't it? And anyway, and Harry mentions his wife. Well, I'm assuming it's his wife. He says, I can't go near Big Alice while she's got this heart condition. So what he was talking about before the open heart surgery. He goes, I mean, any excitement could be dangerous for her, you know. And Bomber said, I thought it was all go for a plumber's mate. And he said, you must be joking. He says, all right, lads, I'm off. Have a nice weekend. I'll see you all on Monday. And by the way, don't forget, if you get desperate, it's country and western night down in my local. And they go, all right. And he says, right. And anyway, Dennis. And if you'll notice, Dennis has a bit of a smirk on his face at this point. So he's got a bit of a knowing look that basically says that he knows something that other people don't. And he says, right, we're off to, we'll see you on Sunday, him and Neville Torah lads. And he says, and Oz says, I have a nice boring weekend in Newcastle while we do some humping. Neville says, the difference is you're all gambling. Us married lads is on to a certainty. Torah. Anyway, and Moxie says, Barry's not. And Barry is got his Swiss Army knife out with his scissors.
Grooming his nose.
Grooming his nose hair in the prettiest way possible. And Barry says, don't you be so sure, Moxie, when Hazel hears about my various exploits and my impending foreign travel, she'll probably beg me to ravish her. But I'll say, Hazel, no. Only within the sanctity of marriage will we enter such behaviour. I'm going to be hard with her. And Oz makes a pun. He says, aye, it usually helps. And Wayne says, right now, I can't remember Britain, yeah? He says, the husbands and fiancés have departed. It's time for us dirty philanderers to get to work. Are you ready? And Bomber's ready. He said, right, Bomber's primed and ready to go off.
Yeah.
Wayne says, right, what is it? Pub, disco, brothel? And Moxie says, pub for me. And Oz, again, classic line, he says, it's not a question of choice, man, duck egg. We're gonna do all three. And then Bomber says, finish with a curry, the classic quartet. And they walk outside of Thornley Manor. And there is no motor vehicle to be seen. And Oz says, hold on. We haven't got a car, have we? And Wayne says, oh, shit, I forgot, didn't I? And this is it. Bomber says, no wonder Dennis was smirking. He knew we'd be stranded. And Wayne says, there must be a good time to be had out there somewhere. And Oz goes, oh, aye, nude badger watching. And they start to walk into the village.
A small bit of trivia, If they actually did walk from Thornley Manor to the Barley Mow, do you know how long it would take them?
Oh, quite some time, I would expect.
6 hours and 41 minutes.
6 hours? How far? Jesus Christ, how far is it?
According to Google Maps, yeah, that's how long it would take them to walk.
Well, again, a little bit of poetic license used in the storyline there. And Oz says the classic quartet, did you say? So they enter the Barley Mow. And again, Arthur is not pleased to see them at all, as usual. And he says, and Oz says, evening, Arthur. And he says, a bit overdressed, aren't we? And obviously Arthur's got a bow tie, and he says, listen to who's talking. He says, look at this, dolled up like, and he says to me something, he says, dolled up like a something doctor's clerk, isn't he? He says, although, you know, Arthur, I think you might be right for once. He says, should we go through to the lounge, lads? And Bomber says, why not? It's supposed to be our night out after all. And Oz says, oh yeah, he says, 4 pints, Arthur, and sling them next door, I think. And Arthur realizes he might have made a mistake. He goes, I don't want my lounge bar customers upset. You may be smartly dressed, but you're still a lot of yobs. And he says, just get the beer next door. And he says this, and he goes through and he says, oh, this is much more our hand, like. And Wayne says, I bet there's some right rancid goings on here at the weekend, eh? And Oz goes, you reckon? He goes, aye. And Wayne says, yeah, black witches, covens, human sacrifices. And I don't know what he says. How about volunteering, young man? And obviously for the human sacrifice. And Oz just goes, just get 2 more pints on the bar here and answer the question. And he goes, oh, yeah. And he goes, and an answer to a question. And Pringle says, how about no? And Oz says, no, listen. He says, come here, man, come here. He says, how do we go about getting sex round here? And Wayne says, who do we have to talk to? And he says, Ian, Pringle, deeply offended. He says, if what you refer to occurs in this village, it occurs within the confines of the home between consenting adults, invariably married couples, and invariably of the opposite sex. And Oz makes a joke. He says, wife swapping, is that the order of is that the name of the game? He says, right, that'll do us. Just tell us where to get sorted, Arthur, because we're in the same boat as ye, you see. Riderless horses. And Arthur says, I think you're in for a big disappointment here tonight. And Wayne says, is that the only it's the only reason we're here, Arthur? And he says, yeah, lads. So I make the best of these. If I was you, looks like they're going to be the highlight of the evening, talking about the beers. Bobber says, you would think there would be a young farmer's dance or something going on, wouldn't you? Few strapping country wenches in gaily coloured frocks. That'll do, Bomber. Bomber's got a bit of a fantasy going on there, which I don't think is going to come true. And Moxie says they've probably all gone into town looking for rough house building workers. And I says, yeah. He says, why, Christ? He goes, we're kind of stopping here, I'll neat man, can we? He says, drive up the bloody wild this. And Bomber points out, he says, we are a bit stuck though, aren't we, Oz? And Wayne suggests, he says, we could always nip down to the Cross Keys, try and pull a couple of the Henriettas. And Moxie says, no chance there, Wayne. He says, why not? He says, we got style, we got chat, we got money, just the same as some of them, you know. And he says, yeah, he says, but he says, you see, one of the disadvantages about having a more equal society is that the toffs cannot find any real peasants to shaft anymore. You see, you know what I mean? He says, you see, in the old days, it was all right. He says, in the days of the gamekeepers and the colliers, he says, it was the attraction of opposites that did it. He says, but now, he says, us, he says, we've traveled the world, haven't we? You know, we're self-employed. I mean, we're sophisticated blokes like us, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Oz reckons he's sophisticated. And Moxie, to highlight how sophisticated they are, he says, does anybody want some pork scratch? So they are, so we cut up to Newcastle. Dennis is at Norma's, and he comes in and he says that Kevin, his son, who's I think is a little bit young, he says wants Hill Street Blues recording. Do you remember Hill Street Blues, George?
Oh, used to watch it every week. Brilliant show.
I think it was a little bit before my time.
Oh, it was a brilliant, fantastic show.
Anyway, but Kevin, Dennis's son, who's quite young, apparently wants it recording, and he says if that's all right, he says yes. And he says, Dennis says, just leave them pots, I'll do them later. And he goes, and he's fiddling around with the video, and he says, pour us a couple of brandies. He says, I don't want any more to drink, Dennis. And he says, hey, and he sets the table. He says, when I was a kid, I spent my Sunday mornings either playing football or a church parade with the boys brigade. Nowadays, they come straight down from the bedroom and watch sex and violence on the telly. It can't be any good for them. And Norma says, I blame the parents myself, which is talking about Dennis, which is a bit much. So anyway, Dennis gets up and pours himself a brandy and says, Dennis, I don't want to start nagging you, but you're putting the drink away these days. Is there something bothering you? So she starts having a little bit of a go, and he says, I just drink when I'm winding down, Norma. It helps us relax. Anyway, he says, hey, I was reading this article in the journal the other day that said drinkers were less likely to have heart attacks than those who didn't drink. I knew I was right all along. Anyway, Norma says, did Neville mention our little chat to you at during the week? And Dennis is like, oh, Jans, what's that? And she goes, about you and Ali Fraser and money. And he says, he mentioned it, so I put his mind at rest. And Norma says, oh. And he says, Ali's trying to get us to Spain for this next job. And she goes, by choices. And he goes, look, Norma, once and for all, I'm straight with Ali Fraser, right? By the time we're finished at the manor and we complete this Spanish work, that'll probably be the end of our relationship. And she goes, probably. And he goes, well, look, man, if he keeps coming up with work for me and the rest of the lads, we kind of keep turning it down, can we? I mean, I kind of can't do in the job centre and say, oh, we've been offered some work, but we didn't fancy that. Have you got anything? She goes, Dennis, just look me straight in the eye and tell me you don't owe Ali Fraser money. And he swerves the question. He says, bloody hell, Norma, what is this? The Spanish Inquisition. So A, they're about to go to Spain. But B, the Spanish Inquisition, remember that from Monty Python? I didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. And then she goes, no, I just want to know. And he goes, well, it's none of your business, pet. And she goes, oh, isn't it? She goes, yeah, it's my business when you want a place to stay, or to bring your kids for the weekend, or a place for your bloody mates to doss in. That's my business. Look, if you want to help me, Dennis, you're going to have to be straight with us. And he goes, I am straight with you. And she goes, well, that's not what I'm hearing around the doors. And Dennis has got the hump, and he goes, well, if it's only around the bloody gossip, there's only bloody gossip that's getting on your nerves, why don't you bloody move, man? And she goes, look, Dennis, you don't seem to understand. We are family. It doesn't matter how far you travel or how old you get, you're still my little brother, and I care about you. And so she puts it on him, and she goes, how much do you owe? And Dennis he finally cracks, and he realizes he can't avoid it any much longer, and he says, 6 grand. And she goes, what? And he goes, £6,000. And she goes, Dennis. And he goes, look, Norma, man, it's not as bad as all that, man. He says, half the countries in debt are living off credit. He says, there's not much difference between Ali Fraser and access cards. And she says, well, except he's got the power to make you do what he wants. And he says, look, Norma, I'm only a brickie. I'm only building a house for him. I'm not a contracted killer or something. And I've told you, once we've finished the Spanish work, I'll be in the clear. That's the deal. I promise. I'll be off the hook within 3 months. And she says, honest. And he says, well, would I lie to me big sister, knowing the hiding I'd get when she found out? And so Norma's quite happy with that. And she has a laugh and she says, go on, I think I'll have that brandy then. So,
back to the Barley Mow.
We are back to the Barley Mow, and Oz is about to meet someone, and so we are in the Barley Mow, and a very, very delectable young lady, older lady walks in.
Yeah, middle age.
And so, first things first, have you noticed what her name is?
In what character name? Yeah, Joy Chatterley.
So yes, they call her Mrs. Chatterley, which is obviously a direct reference to Lady Chatterley of Lady Chatterley's lover. So it is her name, her actress name, who plays Mrs. Chatterley, is Morag Hood. and Morag had 44 entries and on IMDb, and her career started back in Z Cars. She was in Coronation Street. She was in Bergerac. She was in Hamish Macbeth. She was in Heartbeat, and she was in a TV show called Harry. And you know who the star of Harry was?
I can't remember. Who was that?
Your friend, Michael Elphick.
Oh, wow. Big Michael. Right.
Yeah, so Harry, like I say, Michael Elphick was the star of a TV show called Harry, and she was in Harry. So there's a slightly tenuous link to your best gin customer.
gin swigger extraordinaire.
Yeah, very much so. So Lady Chatterley, as I'm going to call her from now on, Lady Chatterley walks into the Barley Moor, and she's very well spoken. She goes, "Hello, Arthur," and he says, "Hello, Joy." So her name is Joy Chatterley, but we're just going to call her Lady Chatterley. And she goes, "A gin and tonic, please." And he goes, "How are you? Long time no see." And she goes, "Well, I've been tied to the house while Tim's been working so hard." And he says, "Oh, he's not coming in tonight?" Now, do you think that Arthur has got a little bit of a soft spot for you?
Oh, definitely.
And he's like, "Oh, he's not coming in tonight." And Arthur's potentially thinking, "Oh, he might get himself a bit of action." And she goes, "No, he won't be back till 10. But I couldn't have another night in with the telly, so I thought I'd put my glad rags on and have an hour in the pub." And Arthur says, "Well, it's nice to see you again." And anyway, so Oz notices young Lady Chatterley, and he says, "Yeah, have you seen her at the bar?" And Bomber says, "Oh, that's handsome, all right." And Wayne says, "Very tasty. Bit out of your league, though, Oz?" And Moxie says, "But then again, what isn't?" And Oz takes umbrage with that. He says, "Hey, you." He says, "No," he says, I've got a thing about older women." And Wayne says, "Well, there can't be many left for blokes of your years." And Moxie says, why don't you stay on at the manor when it opens? As a home, you could really fill your boots then." And again, Oz isn't too happy with Moxie. He says, "Look, I've told you, haven't I?" And there's a bit of a giggle around the table. And Oz says, "No." He says, he says, "I think there's just something really exciting about a wifey with a few years experience." That's a proper Geordie word as well, that wifey, calling a woman a wifey. He goes, "Excited about a wifey with a few years experience under her belt. You know what I mean?" He says, "But who still looks a bit tidy, like a tidy bit of tackle." He says, "Just oozing charm and sensuality, if you like." He says, "You know what I mean? Most," he says, "must come from watching all of them." Now, I don't know what he says.
It'll be a Christelle, is it?
No, he says, "must come from watching all them Simone Sig something."
I thought he said Sylvia Christelle. She was in the Emmanuel films.
Oh, right. To be honest, I thought he said Simone.
They were like soft porn films.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, I might have been young, George, but I definitely know what the Emmanuel films were.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't really hear what he said. And then he said, "From when I was a bairn, like," so it might not have been Emmanuel if Oz was talking about watching it as a kid, unless he had a taste for softcore porn as a child. And he says, I'm very impressionable. And Moxie says, "Simony who?" And Bomber says, "Oh, Mox, you've missed out on life." And Wayne says, "I've never heard of her neither." And he says, "No," he says, "Right." He says, "Well, it's down to me and ye, Bomber." And Oz says, sit down. I saw her first." He says, "Right, same again, is it?" And Oz, this is for the first time ever, I think Oz is about to buy 2 rounds in a row. And Wayne points it out and he says, "Didn't you get the last one, Oz?" And Oz says, "Oh, I never thought I'd hear you cribbing about that, eh?" And he says, "Arthur," he says, "sorry about having to push." And anyway, so he goes up the bar and says, "Arthur." And then he looks down at Lady Chatterley and he says, "Sorry about having to push in like this, love." And she goes, "Oh, that's all right. You've got to get served, haven't you?" And he says, "You have, haven't you?" He says, "Arthur, 4 more pints and a drink for the lady, I think." And she goes, well, that's very kind, but no, thank you. And then he makes a very, very classy line. He says, no, he says, however, he says, it can't be very nice for you sniffing that armpit, can it? He says, "Gan on," and the look on Pringle's face, Pringle isn't happy at all. So again, this is, I think Pringle was maybe fancying his chances with Lady Chatterley. And she goes, well, I hadn't really looked at it that way, to be honest. And he goes, nah, well, do you want a drink? And she goes, perhaps another G&T then. And he goes, right, G&T. Did you get that, Arthur? And he goes, I heard. And she goes, can't get it then. And yeah, Pringle's not happy. And he goes, hey, what an out tosspot he is, isn't he, that Arthur? And she goes, well, actually, this has been my local for nearly 8 years now, but I agree, he can be a little bit grumpy. And he says, oh, I can't he? And Bomber, we cut back to the table, and Bomber says, oh, he seems to be doing all right. And Wayne says, yes, steaming along, ain't he? So Lady Chatterley starts questioning us. Do you live round here? And he goes, aye, Thornley Manor. And she goes, and she looks, and she goes, you? And he goes, oh, I didn't own it. Like, no, working up there. Self-employed builder. Me and my colleagues, and Oz puts a bit of an air and grace on. Says, me and my colleagues, renovation, like. And she go, and Pringle puts the drinks down, and he goes, there we are. And he says, and again, he tries to fucking cockblock Oz.
Yeah.
He goes, is this man annoying you, Mrs. Chatterley? And she goes, no, I was just about to ask him if he would be interested in helping me with a few repairs on our garage. Tim's useless. Tim's useless with his hands. And the fact that Tim's useless with his hands could potentially be interpreted in more ways than one, couldn't it, young George?
Yeah.
And she goes, Tim's useless with his hands, as you know, Arthur. Now, that line, as you know, Arthur, do you think that Arthur might have already tasted the fruits of young Lady Chatterley?
Oh, well, I mean, she's not backward at coming forward, so, you never know.
And potentially, Arthur might have been expecting a repeat performance until...
Yeah.
So you never know. Because if she's going to put it around with Oz, she might be looking to put it around with anybody else.
Yeah.
And Pringle's straight up, and again tries to cock block as best he can. He says, Tim's the lady's husband. And Oz says, right, well, he says, yeah, of course. He says, if there's anything I can do, yes, I'll be happy to try. And she goes, could you manage Monday? And he goes, Monday, well, I'd have to consult my colleagues, but I think it would be all right. Hang on a minute. I'll just have to a little word with them. And so he goes over, and Moxie says, I hope he's coming back. He must have been elbowed. And Oz says, you'll not believe what's happening here. And Moxie says, what? And she says, she only wants me to go round there on Monday to see her, take me tool bag and do a bit of work on a garage. And they're all like, Moxie. And Oz says, no, straights. And again, that's a proper Geordie word, that, like, if you try, straights, as in it's straight up. And Bomber says, never happened in the room at the top, Oz. So obviously that's referring to a story about, I'm assuming about, a servant living upstairs.
Yeah, it was a book and a film in the late 60s, I think, Room at the Top.
Ah, right. And then Oz says, I says, but that was a film and this is reality. So they cut to Barry. And so Barry is at Hazel's and...
oh, this is quite funny, this bit. Yeah.
Well, exactly. So Barry is at Hazel's and so...
He's practicing.
well, we don't know that, do we? What we think is we think that he's laying down the law to Hazel and he says, Hazel, look, I don't want to push you into any corners, but a man of my age with various opportunities at my command can't wait for one woman forever. I mean, the other day, me and the fellas had this elemental confrontation with, well, I suppose, evil, you might call it. We faced up to rampant, uncaring capitalism and brought it to account, forced it to come to terms with our feelings. An experience like that can change a man, Hazel, make him more sure of himself, make him less willing to put up with being treated badly, like I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's that I want a decision from you as to whether you're going to be my wife or not. Yes, yeah. And he goes, yay or nay. Otherwise, it will be time for me to pack up my bags and move down the highway of life. He goes, there you go. And he sort of looks a little bit unsure, and then it looks up and Hazel enters the room carrying
with a tea.
And it reveals that Barry has been talking to himself. And she says, oh, do you want a biscuit with this, Barry? And he says, no, thanks. I'm still stodged, actually. And she goes, well, that was a lovely meal, Barry. Thank you. And he says, that's all right, kid. If I can't treat you, who can I treat? And she goes, black or white? Obviously meaning the tea. And he goes, I don't mind, really. Either will do fine. So we've gone from being Barry, the firm, Barry, the demanding the decision, to now he can't even make his mind up whether he wants milk in his tea. And she goes, still the same old indecisive Barry. And he goes, I don't know. I gave that waiter a hard time when he brought out avocado and vinaigrette instead of avocado and prawns. And he gets the tea and he goes, busting tar. And she goes, when will you be off to Spain then? He says, a couple of weeks, I think. Yes, after we finish at the manor. And she goes, I'll bet you will have a lovely time. And he goes, it's not just working relationship that me and the lads have. No. It's more than that. It's a stronger bond. It's friendship forged in adversity. We play hard and we work hard, but we do it all together. And and then she goes, and where will you go after that? And he says, I thought I'd come back and try and sort things out between me and you. And again, he's very, timid and unsure about himself. He's got no confidence. And she says, look, I'm sorry, Barry. I find this rather difficult to say to you, but I think I still need a bit more time, to come to terms with the idea of, marriage. And he goes, Hazel, look, I don't want to push you into any corners. I'll leave it to you to tell me whether or not. And then he sort of mumbles. He's like, bruh. And she goes, bless you, Barry. You're so understanding. So Barry has gone up there with the intention of trying to force Hazel's hand, but we clearly see that he's not got it in him. So it cuts to the manor. So it's the next morning. It's obviously Sunday. Moxie's made the tea and he says, wakey, wakey, rise and shine, morning tea is served. So we see Oz in his sleeping bag, one sock on, and there's beer
cans
everywhere. And he says, a cup of tea, Oz. And he says, oh, Moxie, man. He says, I was just about to consummate the relationship with Mrs. Chatterley there. And he says, I'm sorry. And he says, we were lying on this beach somewhere, rolling about in the surf, and she was making these ecstatic moaning noises. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And Bomber goes, 'cause you fixed her garage. And Wayne says, yeah, and your tool bag is drifting off out to sea. And he goes, ha, ha, ha. And he goes, you've got no sense of romance, you lot, man. And Mox says, romance? And he says, sheer bloody carnal lust, more like. And Oz says, well, there's nothing wrong with that, though, Moxie. Makes the world go round. And Moxie brings up his wife and he says, oh, aye. He says, I hope your Marjorie feels the same way. And he goes, actually, she says, I'll read about that. That's the sort of thing War Marjorie likes. He says, I think she realises that she's got to give a bloke like me a bit of rope, if she wants to hang on to us. And I mean, then Oz is out his sleeping bag in his famous get-up of his pants and his vest. And I mean, he's living in absolute filth. The beer cans everywhere, the filth, the dirty clothes. And he's talking about how his missus has got to give him a bit of rope if she wants to hang on to him. So we cut back to Newcastle. And this is a very famous part of Newcastle. This is the quayside of Newcastle. And we look up and we can see the bridges. We can see the Tyne Bridge, the Swing Bridge. Now, actually, at this time, not only at this time as in the year, but at this time of the week. So on a Sunday morning in the quayside in Newcastle, there used to be a massive market. Quayside market. So where they are actually right now, that would have been covered in market stalls. But
Yeah.
again, a little bit of poetic license. Sunday morning, Quayside, and Dennis is walking down with his daughter, who is called Angela. So Dennis is walking, and Angela says, "What were you and Auntie Norma rowing about last night?" And he says, "I thought you were supposed to have been asleep. Anyway, we weren't round, we were just talking, business-like." And she goes, "Oh, Kevin had his ear to the floor, said you were shouting about money. Nosy little bugger kids." And he goes, no, shouting about money. And then all of a sudden, from down the quayside, Marjorie appeared. "Dennis Patterson!" And he's like, "Oh, no way." And he goes, "Oh, hell," he goes, "I'll just put this buckle right on your shoe." And she goes, "What's up, Dad? There's nothing wrong with me buckle." And he goes, "It's all right, Pet. It's just that lady over there. She happens to be the wife of one of the nutcases I work with. Do you remember Oz? I don't particularly want to talk to her, that's all." And it's too late. She's like, "Yoo-hoo, I thought that was you." And he goes, "Hello, Marjorie." And she goes, "This must be one of your bands, is it?" And he goes, "Aye, this is Angela." And she goes, "How's Vera?" And then he goes, "Well," he goes, "we've actually split up again." He goes, "We've split up again, actually." And she goes, and straight away sticks her big foot in her even bigger mouth. She goes, "Oh, Pet, I am sorry." And she goes, "And after you left some nice German lass." And
German.
And he goes, "Aye, well," he goes, "that's all in the past now, Marjorie, And she goes, "You haven't heard from our Oz, have you?" And he goes, No, not really. When did you last hear from him?" And she goes, "He sent us a postcard from the Falklands. Nay, stamp, of course. Aye, God knows where he is now." And Angela, about to drop a minute, she goes, "He came round." And he goes, "I did hear he's back in England," cuts off his daughter. And she goes, "You've got no idea where he is, have you?" And she goes, "Shouldn't you know more about that than me, Marjorie?" And she goes, "I'd be the last one to hear." She goes, "I'd be the last one to hear, Pet. Now, anyway, if he does get in touch, will you tell him, to get in touch with me, I've got some good news for him." And he goes, "Oh, that'll cheer him up. If I do come across him, what's the good news?" And she says, "I'm divorcing the sod." So we cut back to the manor, and Barry arrives, and they say pride comes before a fall. So obviously they're talking about what happened, and Moxie says, "Hey up, it's the Wolverhampton Wanderer." And he goes on, and he goes, "How did you get on with Hazel? Did you set a date for the nuptials?" And he goes, yeah, sort of. Narrowed it down to two alternatives, 1988 or 1989. And Wayne says, "So she says yes." And Barry's trying to, dance around. He says, yeah, sort of. Says, I give her an ultimatum, didn't I? I said, "You can decide to marry me when I come back from Spain. Otherwise, I'm going to hang myself." That, what an ultimatum. And she responded to that quite favourably. Meaning what, And she said, "Well," she says, "you might marry me if I didn't hang myself, but she definitely wouldn't if I did." And Wayne just says, "Seems fair." Now Oz chimes in. He says, "Barry and half, forgive us if I sound a bit harsh here, son, but in my opinion, you've made a right bollocks of this relationship." And he goes, "Oh, thank you, great wise one. What was I supposed to do?" And he says, "You should have laid down the law, man. Bang early on, the way you do with an Alsatian. Terrorise the little bastards when they're puppies. And then you get knee, and when they get older, you get knee beef from them." So Oz is relating his relationship with ladies to the way that he would treat
a dog.
And he says, he says, he says, and again, classic line, he goes, "You're cattled, aren't you?" You know what that is, George?
No.
You are cattled. Cattle trucked. Fucked.
Oh, right.
Bit of rhyming slang there.
Bit of Cockney rhyming slang. Right.
Bit of Cockney rhyming slang from the Geordie. He says, "You're cattled, aren't you?" He says, "Even if she does turn around and tie the knot and marry you, which I've got no doubts about," he says, "there's going to come a time, later years, when she's going to turn round and give ye a right out savaging. Take my word for it." But Barry's not too happy. He goes, not only is that offensive to women in general, and my Hazel in particular, it's also a load of pig and garbage. You turn complex human relationships into bloody crufts. For Claire Rayner, substitute Barbara Woodhouse. So Claire Rayner was the agony aunt, and Barbara Woodhouse was the dog trainer.
That's it, yeah.
Walkies, I always remember that.
Sit. Yeah.
Walkies. And Oz says, I know what I'm talking about. Here's exactly what I'm talking about here. Now, Neville and obviously Dennis walk in. He goes, take Neville here. He's just been for the weekend, and I bet you a pudding of a penny his lass has had him washing and cleaning and cooking and ironing in the whole 9 yards. Classic case of the tail wagging the dog. So again, pride coming before a fall. And Neville says, what's you on about? And Barry says, how to handle women Osborne style makes you puke. And Dennis goes, I got all the answers, has he? And Oz goes, I know what I'm talking about. And he goes, he goes, can I have a word, Oz, mate? And he goes, where are you? He goes, outside in private. And he goes, in private? And obviously Oz isn't used to doing anything in private. So Oz and Dennis walk out. He goes, right, what? And he goes, shut the door. He goes, what for? He goes, I've got no secrets from anybody. He goes, just shut the door, man, will you? And he goes, right. And he shuts the door. And he goes, right, door shut. What do you want? And he goes, I bumped into your Marjorie in Newcastle this morning. And straight away he panics. He goes, you haven't told her where I was, have you? He goes, no, of course not. But she wants you to get in touch. And he goes, whining after money again, was she? He goes, no, not exactly. She wants a divorce. So Oz has been claiming to be the guru of women, and Dennis brings him down a couple of pegs. But then he goes, divorce from me? And he goes, well, who else, man? He goes, but a divorce? I mean, on what grounds?
What possible grounds? Yeah.
It's like if he's on the most possible, like as if he's the most perfect husband. And Dennis lays it down. He goes, well, I don't know. Adultery, desertion, mental cruelty, quite a few to choose from, you know there. And he goes, she goes, she's probably just whinging because I haven't seen her for a while. I'll give her a bit of slaver. Again, that's a proper Geordie word, that. I'll give her a bit of slaver when we're going to Newcastle. That always tides them over. I'm just saying to Barry, owning a wife is very similar to owning a dog. Just a pity one license costs a bit more than the other. Mm-hmm. So we've gone from Oz getting a divorce. It cuts to the next day.
In the van.
And Oz is in the van and he's going to Lady Chatterley's. And so he rings on the door. And she's obviously all dolled up. And before she answers the door, she walks
does that.
She's all making sure she's looking good. And so Oz says, good morning. And she goes, oh, hello, you remembered? He goes, well, a promise is a promise, isn't it? She's like, come in. And he comes in. And she goes, well, now, come through to the kitchen. And she's got and Oz has got a big smile on his face. Oz obviously knows what's expected. And she goes, would you like some coffee or something stronger?
Yeah.
And he goes, well, I'll just have what you're having, if that's all right. And she goes, well, let's see now. It's gone 12. I think we could manage a gin and tonic, don't you? And he goes, top of the bill. Aye. And he goes, can I put this down here? And he puts his tools down. And she goes, anywhere you want. And he goes, lovely place you've got here. Mind you, forget about proper houses. What proper houses look like, you know, the amount of time we've been dossing in that dirty old manor. He says, well, I bought it 8 years ago. Mind you, we've done a lot of work to it since. And he goes, all right, you can see that. Lovely. I thought you said he wasn't good with his hands, your husband. Oz, trying to, test the water and just check. And she goes, well, he isn't. But he's very good at giving money to people that are. And again, she turns it round, basically saying that hopefully Oz is good with his hands. And she goes, and he goes, well, that's all right. And cheers. And she goes, ice. And he goes, yes, please. And then straight away she starts. So they've got their drinks. And she goes, are you married, Oz? He goes, well, I was until last night, but apparently there's a divorce in the post. And she goes, oh dear, sorry. He goes, oh, that's all right. Worst things happen in China, suppose. And he finishes his drink. And she goes, right, I better get started on this garage then, hadn't I? And she goes, and great lines here, great bit of writing. She goes, well, there's no rush, is there? And he goes, well, I told the lads I'll be back at work this afternoon, like, and it might look a bit dodgy if your husband comes back and I'm here, mightn't it? And she goes, well, he's only just left, actually. Noon till 8 he's on today, so there's plenty of time. And he goes, right. He goes, well, where's this garage? He looks at him straight and smiles, and she goes, what garage? So she's making it very, very plain why Oz is there. And it's obviously not to fix the garage, is it, young?
No. Well, he was hardly dressed for manual work anyway, was he?
Oh, he had his best clothes on. He had his jacket on.
Yeah.
So Oz obviously does the job that he was expected to do with Lady Chatterley, and he comes back. And so the lads are having a tea break out the back. And Wayne says, oh, no, he says, only 3 hours. He says, I thought you said you weren't a speed freak. And Moxie says, it's not bad, Wayne. You know, you could have built a garage in that time, never mind repair one. And Dennis says, well, I hope you don't expect to be paid for this afternoon. He says, just pour us a cup of tea, will you? And Harry says, come on then, blow by blow account. And Bomber rightly points out, he says, the boy looks wrecked. She's certainly taken it out of him.
He looked very satisfied.
He does. He looks a great bit of acting by Jimmy Neal. He sits down and he goes, unbelievable. He goes, it's the only word for it. But he says, if I told you, you wouldn't believe it. So, and Barry says, well, we won't know until you tell us, will we? And he says, well, you know, I was saying in the bar the other night about older women. And Moxie says, experience. He says, aye. He says, yeah, experience and all that beef. He says, dear me, this one makes Simone Signoret look like Shirley Temple, that one. And Neville says, well, that doesn't mean now to me. I've never seen either of them. And Oz says, well, I'll try and put it another way. And Wayne goes, you obviously did. And he says, you know, when a footballer gets to a certain age, says they've got to slow their game down, you know, but they seem to get better, they seem to get to be better players because of experience, you know, like Johnny Giles, Leeds and Ireland. He says, I feel like I've been playing with someone like him for 90 minutes of soccer. And Moxie says, it's funny you should mention that about footballers, because the only older woman that I looked like Billy Bremner. Moxie had a woman that looked like Billy Bremner. So anyway, Ali pulls up in the car, and he says, it looks very impressive from the drive, Dennis. And Dennis says, wait till you see it from the inside, man. And he says, I've got a little bit of refreshment to celebrate completion. I hope you noticed that it's Spanish. And he's got bottles of Carver. And he says, let me just he says, this'll put us in the mood, eh? And Oz, like, you know, he says, I was expecting something a bit more solid, you know what I mean? And obviously he's demanding the money. And Ali's like, correct, Sonny Jim, right, Dennis. Share that amongst your boys. And, you know, true to his word, Ali Fraser is paying the lads out, and he's obviously paying them a decent bonus. And Dennis says, right, and he starts handing out the wages. So, the lads, you know, they've finished their work, they've been given the money, and Wayne's got his handful of money, and he says, right now I can get my beloved motor out. And he says to Dennis, can I borrow your van? And he says, aye, here you are. And he gives Wayne the keys. He says, I'll need someone to drive it back. And Dennis volunteers Oz. He says, right, Oz. And he says, what? He says, off you go, Wayne, to make sure he doesn't spend his finishing bonus on the way across. And he goes, why me? Like, he says, because we've spent 2 months tarting this place up, and I don't want a lunatic like you in there pissed. And he says, no, he says, I'm not gone. He says, I'm still the gaffer, so get gone. Again, that's a proper Geordie saying that. Get gone. Get going. Get gone. And so here we go. And this is the classic. Classics. So they pull up outside the customs place, which is a bit strange to have the customs place in Dock.
Airport, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, you'd think that they would be, like you say, either at an airport. So I suppose it could be East Midlands Airport. Was that around? Was that?
I wouldn't know.
Or Birmingham. Anyway, so they see and Wayne. So they see Wayne's car in the compound, and he says, "There, look." He says, "800 quid, and they haven't even bloody cleaned it." And Oz says, "They've probably been out joyriding in it, man. Did you check the clock before you gave it?" And he says, "I didn't think of that." He's
and Oz has a bottle of champagne in his pocket.
Yeah. Aye.
The carver, yeah.
He says, "Well, I'll come in with you and I'll tell them I'm your legal advisor." So they go in and the customs guy is there. And he says, "Right, shouldn't take too long, Mr. Norris. You have the full amount with you, I presume?" And he goes, "Course, there it is. It's in pounds, though, not Deutschmarks. Is that all right, son?" And he's obviously been a bit sorry. He says, "There's no need for sarcasm, sir." And Oz says, "Well, there's no need to count it." He says, "It's all there." And he goes, "Well, I have to check, sir, just in case you've given me too much." So he was saying there's too much, no need for sarcasm, but then he's being sarcastic back. And Wayne says, "Here, listen," he says, "I've paid you up in full. I don't suppose you can tell me who shopped me, can you?" And he goes, "Certainly not. It's privileged information." He goes, "Well, I thought it might be." Well, anyway, so on the shelf in the office,
the
is a picture of none other than Lady Chatterley. And so Oz nods to Wayne and laughs. And obviously the guy notices that Oz and Wayne are laughing at the picture. And he says, "Oh, I was just looking at the photograph." He says, "Lovely lady. Who is it, do you know?" And he goes, "That happens to be my wife, sir." And Oz bursts out with laughter. And obviously the guy looks up and Wayne says, "Very attractive, wouldn't you say, Oz?" And he goes, "What?" He goes, "Oh, he goes, not my cup of tea, but a tiny bit of tackle." And he goes, "Right, I'll get you a receipt, Mr. Norris. Wait a minute." So as he walks out, Oz face palms and laughs. And he's like, can't keep it in. And Wayne, very, very, very entertained by this scenario, goes, "Well, I declare, as they say in the trade." And Oz says, "Can you believe it? It's ironic, really, when you think about it." He goes, "If he hadn't have nabbed your car, I wouldn't have knobbed his well."
Knobbed.
Again, he going, "That's poetic justice. That's what I call it." He goes, "Here, talking of justice, right?" He goes, "Keep your dog eye." He goes, "Because I want to check who shopped me." So Oz goes to keep watch and Wayne starts flicking through the paper. And Oz says out there, he says, "Hold on, here we go." He says, and he finds a letter and he says, "Dear sir, acting on information received from a Mr. Arthur Pringle of the Barley Moor Inn." And Oz is like, "Pringle, I might have known it would have been that old bastard." So it's the next morning and the phone is ringing and Arthur is like in his pajamas inside the Barley Moor, and he picks up the phone and Wayne says, "Hello, Arthur." He goes, "This is Wayne Winston Norris with your all early morning call." And they all laugh. And he's none too happy. He goes, this your idea of a joke, you cretin?"
Cretin.
And he says, No, I'm not joking." He goes, "Because I ain't got a sense of, because I know you ain't got a sense of humor." He says, "See, look," he says, "why we're ringing is to say bye-bye, because we're off elsewhere, you see, and to tell you about the little going away present we have left you." And he says, "Now look, if you care to look outside of your front door." So they all look, they're all outside the phone box, and Pringle opens his front door to discover that the lads have him a nice wall. And so they all start singing, "Wall meet again, wall meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know wall meet again some sunny day." And obviously they cut outside and it says, and on the wall they've written in paint, "Wall meet again,
Bacon balls.
And then they scream down the floor, and Wayne screams, "Ta-da, Arthur!" And thus ends the episode. So that is the last bit for the episode, which is the end of Pringle, the end of Thornley Manor, the end of Derbyshire, and we are now going to go back up to Newcastle before we head to Spain. So, again, like I say, fantastic episode there. It's finishing off the job in Derbyshire and it's linking up to the new one. They've got their revenge on Pringle and they got the revenge on the VAT man, although he probably doesn't know it. And like I said, some absolute classic lines in there. An absolutely fantastically written episode. So, if any of our listeners or watchers have anything that they would like to discuss with us about this episode or anything else, please do email us on aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. Please do follow us on Instagram at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Our Twitter is @Auf Again. Please follow us on Facebook and like and share the Facebook page, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Search that, click the subscribe button and click that bell. And that will remind you of any new episodes. If you just prefer audio, you can get us on all good podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Podcast, Breaker, and many, many more. New episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. And our theme music is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Our sponsor, Top Gun Tattoo, is from number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website is topguntattoo.co.uk. Their number is 01189 968 667, and you can get a 20% discount with Zach with the code word Hathaway and Shiteman. And remember, we offer a free Neville and Lottie tattoo for every single watcher and listener. And I forgot to mention earlier on, this is the final week for our giveaway competition. We've had a good response, but we will be running this one for one more week. So if you would like to win the genuine, original, signed copy of this black and white of the 7 in the Barley-Moor, this the last week of the Barley-Moor and the last week of the competition, it's on our social medias. So if you've got to go on to Twitter, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, there are posts on there for the giveaway. You need to follow us on social media. You need to like the post. You need to tag 3 friends in the post and share the post. So on Facebook, share it to your timeline. Twitter, you retweet the tweet. And on Instagram, you share that to your story and tag us in that share. And you too could be in with a chance of winning this particular picture. And I promised to get our previous winner. We haven't actually sent that out yet. I'm going to do that this week. So apologies for that. So that is it, young George. This week. So an absolutely fantastic episode. And then next week, we are back in Newcastle with some cameo from a very, very famous person who, the famous Geordie actor is cameoed in there. And we will see them next week. But until next week, George.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen, Pet.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I fizzed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky.